Yuri. I'm a psychologist who lives in Denmark. I will talk about these 6 theoretical perspectives in psychology. They're not all contemporary, but they're all pretty modern as such, as you can see here. Okay, before 1870, we had the philosophy as the foundation for psychology. So we didn't really have psychology as a science. And in 1870, after Charles Darwin and his book about natural selection, we started to have some science in psychology. We started to understand human beings as something we could study and something we could investigate, and trying to break down into parts. Okay, so we started to the philosophical and the theoretical scientific foundation of psychology. So we did some small studies on colors and perception of different small objects, and then also some philosophy on how the psychology in the brain actually works. So we started to go away from the old philosophical concept of psychology, like talking about morals and good and evil in human beings, and started to become more scientific. As you can see here, behavioral psychology started in 1930, about thereabout. Then psychoanalysis, humanistic psychology, cognitive psychology, biological psychology, and evolutionary psychology. These are the progresses we have seen, or the scientific fields we have seen, but they're actually not all progresses in psychology as a science, because psychoanalysis and humanistic psychology are not really the scientific foundation. They are the philosophical foundation. So they are based on old philosophy and old philosophical thinking about the human mind and the human soul. While behavioral psychology, cognitive psychology, biological and evolutionary psychology, they are the scientific psychology. This is the science, this is the stuff we can test, this is the measures we do. Okay, and behavioral psychology, it was based on human and animal behavior. So it's stimulus response. You see something, you respond to it. You see food, you want to eat it, okay? You see light, maybe you want to go out to it to get to see stuff around you, or maybe you feel some warmth and you go to the warmth. So it's very, very basic principles and basic programming principles. If A, then B. If I do A to you, if I scare you and show you a cup, then you'll be scared of a cup, okay? Very, very simple-minded conceptions about psychology and the brain, because that's what we could study, and that's how we want, at least in USA, how they wanted to create the foundation for psychology in some departments. In some departments, they still had philosophical aspects to it. So this was the science of psychology. Now we study small objects, now we study behavior. This is scientific, okay? We go away from the soul aspect of it. But of course there was a response. And with Freud and Carl Jung, there was a response to behavioral psychology and the simple-minded scientific psychology. They needed to understand why their patients were crazy in the head. It was clearly not just simple behavior, it was something else, right? So they just said maybe it's something that happens in their childhood, maybe it's unconscious behavior, so something in their unconscious that makes them do some things, because this is not rational. They're not seeing food and wanting to eat food, they're doing some irrational behaviors that we cannot explain. So maybe it's just something in the brain, deep inside the brain, that they developed in their childhood. And they didn't focus that much on genetics, again, because, yeah, I don't know why. It's not really a scientific foundation, so they didn't use scientific studies or anything like that. They just said, okay, maybe it's something that happens then and there. So it was a foundation for psychoanalysis. and the work with patients. You have a foundation and you can work with patients, and then you can explain to patients why what you do is a good thing. But it's just an explanation, a bit like religion, or what you do in the church makes sense because it says so in the Bible, stuff like that. Then of course we had the response to psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis was based on the bad behavior and mental disorders, while humanistic psychology was based on the humanistic philosophical aspects, that human beings are free, we are rational, we need growth, we are individuals, and we strive for something more, we are unique and special, we need to develop ourselves. So it's kind of modern religious aspects of individuality and how you want to be the best you can be, and you think that self-help books and going to lectures about thinking positive or thinking about the secret mind will help you to develop to a full potential. Of course, it's still not a scientific basis for anything, so they didn't actually have studies to prove the concepts. They just said that we need to be better to each other, we need to be happy, we need to be positive, we need to grow. And of course, these two foundations are still not scientific. Yeah, and psychoanalysis is helping others, while humanistic psychology is helping yourself. And these theoretical foundations are still found today. Actually, they have still not died out. Some psychologists still use them, but it's mostly used as a philosophical aspect of psychology. So kind of thinking out of the box and thinking about new aspects of psychology, or thinking about human beings and what it means to be a human being, but not really using science, and sometimes even saying that science cannot explain human beings and cannot explain the concept you have created about human beings. So science cannot explain the unconscious mind because nothing can measure it. It's just gone, it's invisible to every scientific instrument we can ever invent. Of course, we had a response to this old psychology. We had this simple-minded scientific view, and we had the holistic and slightly religious or assumption-based psychology. So we had the response with cognitive psychology, and this response came as a new foundation for psychology, but also came because we had computers. We started to see basic computing. We started to see how computers could solve problems, if-then mechanisms, and then we kind of developed that idea and said that, okay, we do have these if-then processes like we have in behavioral psychology, but let's build upon it, because these if-then processes also combine with each other and work with each other in the head, and they create some mental mechanisms that then process information and then give us some input, and then we react to that input. So it's not really directly, we can work with these cognitive processes, and we know that they are just like software in a computer. Then we had the biological aspect of psychology. Again, we needed to have some scientific foundation to really get started with the biological and cognitive aspect of psychology, because we need some good science. For biological psychology, we need a lot of brain studies, we need brain scannings, we need studies in chemical processes and stuff like that, how the human body reacts to the brain. And it's also, again, a holistic view on the psychology, with that in mind, that the body and the mind is combined to create a human being, and all these processes work together. We have biological machine, just like animals. Just like behavioral psychology said, we are very, very like animals, because it's based on the Darwinian foundation of natural selection. And Freud also said we were like animals, because again, he was a huge fan of Darwin. He said again that we were animals, and we had some strives, we had some needs, and we strive to reproduce, we strive for sexual reproduction, we also strive to kill, because that's also primitive instincts, just like we see in animals. And then humanistic psychology said that no, we need to go back to the pre-Darwinian way of viewing human beings, in that we are souls, we are special, we are unique, we are growing trees. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, it's more hippie-like. So of course we have this scientific response, and now we have behavioral, cognitive, biological psychology, but we actually don't have a foundation for any of this, right? We don't have any theoretical foundation or philosophical foundation, because the foundations we have for psychology, these are these old foundations that have no root in science as such. They have a root in how we want to view human beings. So slowly our foundation started to be created out of biological psychology, and that was called evolutionary psychology. With evolutionary psychology, we finally got an umbrella that could contain all of psychology. So we finally got this combining factor of psychology. Okay, it was based on the idea that the human brain has developed in millions of years, just like any other part of human beings. Just like a heart, just as the legs and the arms, the human brain has also developed via millions of years. And that means that the brain is not just one big sponge, but it's several small mechanisms. It's several small modules, and they all have different instincts, and these different instincts are also all over the brain. So we had like 100,000 instincts, maybe even more, and they all have evolved to solve a specific problem in our environment. For example, the instincts for sexual reproduction would be some other instincts than the instincts we use to take care of the kids we have, or the instincts we use to collect food. Okay, so when you collect food, you use other instincts, use other behavior patterns than the instincts you do to reproduce yourself. So finally we had these foundations that could explain these different cognitive psychology experiments. Why did we have these studies that found out that men really like women with big asses or something like that, or women like tall men? Okay, we could finally explain some of that. We'll also explain some biological processes, because now we had a foundation to explain them. They have evolved, so we need to look at the evolution, we need to look at the biological processes and then the cognitive processes, and combine everything into one. Okay, women like tall men, and we can also see how the brain works when we solve some problems, or when women see pictures of tall men. Okay, so let's see where these scientific areas have ended up today. Behavioral psychology is still used. Okay, it's still a foundation in cognitive psychology and biological psychology and evolutionary psychology. It's still very, very useful, but it's not everything. We still need more than what we have here in behavioral psychology. Then psychoanalysis. Some people still use it today. It's not as popular today as it was back in the day. Okay, so fewer people use it. Fewer people use it in scientific departments. So in the 80s, 70s, 60s, you have more people using it, because a lot of old professors were walking around the universities. Now these professors are dying out, and we are starting to use the scientific psychology more and more and more. But we still have a lot of people who read Freud and love Freud. And also psychoanalysis has split into 1,000 different psychoanalysis, and also 100,000 therapies, or even more. So we have a lot of therapies, and we also have studied the therapies. And the Dodo verdict is the theory that all these psychoanalysis and all these therapies, they basically work the same way. People talk, then they become more healthy mentally, because they talk, and it's something naturally created that we talk and communicate and become social. and then it helps themselves. So the therapist, he listens and the patient talks. That's basically the effect we see in all therapies. So all these small things that we use in different therapies, they are not really the stuff that's working and the stuff that's making the patients better. But also with cognitive therapy, we have the therapy that's super easy to learn. You can learn it in 2 weeks, and it's actually as effective as any other therapy out there, even though it's much easier to learn and practice. But it's also been found out to be more useful for some mental behavioral disorders. So it actually is more effective on some things, but on all other things is practically as effective as anything else. So this is what the response to psychoanalysis have been, and they have not been happy about it. They still think they are needed as a foundation in psychology and as a scientific field, even though modern science does not really support anything they have said. As with humanistic psychology, modern science has not really supported Maslow's pyramid or anything like that, but it's still a great foundation if we need to learn to think philosophically about stuff and ourselves. Maybe, but I still think some of the other foundations also have great philosophy in them. At least evolutionary psychology now has created the philosophical foundation that we can use on all of psychology. So we don't need just to study small mechanisms in the brain or small behavioral patterns. We can now study the human beings as living animals and evolved animals. And then we can explain all mechanisms as mechanisms to solve a certain problem in a certain environment. So either get a food or find a mate or take care of your children or take care of your social life or trade or share food or maybe it can be any area of life, but it is an area of life. It's not just a mechanism. It's like you can investigate in a laboratory and then say, okay, this is enough. Now we know everything about human beings. No, you need the philosophical foundation to understand human beings. Okay, I think that was all. Thank you.